Good day and welcome to another edition of One-on-One with Swope Health. I am your host, Eric Wesson. Thanks so much for joining us. And thanks so much for your comments, your feedback about how much you enjoyed the show, who you'd like to see on the show, as well as the content. So thanks so much for being a part of our program to get information out into the community. Joining me today is Mr. Chris Goode. Everybody knows him from Ruby Jeans, and everybody knows him from the fountain at the plaza, and everybody knows him for his outspokenness with Troost Avenue and changing the name to Truth. So, Chris, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Mr. Wesson, it's an honor and a privilege. Good to see you, sir. Always sharp.
Just trying to be like you. So tell me something. Where are you from?
I'm from here. I'm from Kansas City, Missouri. Ironically, I spent a little bit of time right up the street on East 46th Street. Spent some time on 42nd and Wabash, and then we moved out south, and I graduated from Ruskin High School.
So where'd you go to elementary school?
So I ended up going to George Washington Carver.
Latin grammar.
Okay, familiar. And then finished up at Warford Elementary in Hickman Mills.
Oh, okay, cool. And so, college?
I went to Missouri State University down in, it started at SMS, Southwest Missouri State, and then my junior year, it turned into Missouri State during that period where all the Missouri schools were, I guess, kind of seeking prominence. So CMSU went to University of Central Missouri and things like that. Okay.
So, got married. So, okay, but first, let's back up before you got married. How did Ruby Jeans come about?
Ruby Jeans. So my grandmother, my late grandmother was Ruby Jeans. She died at 61 from type 2 diabetes. She was, while my dad was out figuring himself out and figuring out life, my grandmother served as the backbone that my mother needed. And so we got extremely close to her. Her house still is at 3907 Wabash. We live right down the street at 42nd and Wabash. Mm-hmm. And so we spent a lot of time with Grandma. She never learned to drive a car. And so we would pick her up every Saturday, take her to the grocery store and running up and down from her house. So just got really, really close and fond of my grandmother, grew a strong bond with her. And so when she passed, it was very sudden. She wasn't the type to believe in healthcare. Ironically, sitting here at Swope Health, but there was this notion that it's actually the doctors and the healthcare system that would kill you. It was just a lack of trust, and so she went in too late, really, for what she was dealing with, and ultimately ended up dying in 1999 from type 2 diabetes primarily. Mm-hmm. And so once I got into health and got introduced to juice cleansing specifically, there was a couple of guys that had moved to LA, one from here, one from St. Louis, and I'm just going to hang out on a weekend in LA. They explained to me that they were doing this juice cleanse, a 7-day juice cleanse, and I thought they, were weird, essentially. Mm-hmm. And they explained to me what it was all about, Mr. Wesson. They said, we want to sit you down and show you this documentary. Because the first day they told me I ate. The second day, I still ate. But they said, we got to show you what we up to. And so they sit me down and I watched this documentary with them called Fat, Sick, and Nearly Dead. And at the beginning of it, I wasn't really paying attention. I'm thinking like, all right, let's go to the beach. This will be over soon. But by about midway through it, I realized what I was watching. And it was about this well-to-do guy, CEO of an Australian company that was struggling with his health in many different ways, taking over 10 different types of medicine a day. And so he said, you know what? I got the best doctors. I got the best access to healthcare, and none of it's fixing me. And so he did his research, and he landed on juice cleansing. So taking fresh fruits and vegetables, turning them into liquid, and drinking it. Mm-hmm. His goal was pretty audacious, but he did it. He set out to drink juice for 60 days straight. And so he traveled across the United States in this documentary, and he's sitting with people at truck stops and like, well, why did you pick that to eat? And what he realizes that history, where people came from, people just being in a rush, just doing what they knew to do. Looking at food as this, kind of a measure of happenstance. I'm hungry, so I'm gonna just get it over with and eat this. This is what I always eat. But people were suffering and sick. And so he finishes this journey. He gets a couple of people to join him, and by the end of it, I'm sitting there watching this documentary and like, wait a minute, there's something to this. He was off all medicine. He dropped so much weight. His skin was clear. It was like a complete transformation. And I'm like, well, this ain't, something weird that's been overly edited. This is a documentary, so it's just straight up. And I'm like, man, this dude was able to change his life in 60 days. And my grandmother lived 61 years and allowed type 2 diabetes to take her from us, and it all dawned on me in an instant. Type 2 diabetes is not something that is not preventable. It's based on what do you eat and how much you move your body. And so I'm like, wait a minute. He figured this out in 2 months, and my grandma couldn't figure it out in 6 decades. And so I came home to Kansas City. I said, you know what? I got to try this. I did a 10-day juice cleanse. First 3-4 days was horrible. Horrible. By the end of it, I said, oh my God, there's something to this, and I was an athlete. I played college football, and so I was in fairly good shape, but I really ate whatever I wanted. And so after I finished that cleanse successfully, I said, you know what, maybe I need to start thinking about what I'm putting in my body. And so I started talking to my family, telling my mom, like, hey, maybe we should stop eating fried chicken. And, kind of getting on my family's nerves a little bit, to be honest with you. Like, all right, here come Chris again, giving us all the rules. But I fell in love with it. I fell in love with the ease of, going into a juice bar. I was traveling for work, and I would go to juice bars coast to coast. But long story short, I fell in love with the culture of it, started to introduce my friends and family to it, and then I got tired of traveling. And I was making good money, coming from the east side originally, graduated from Ruskin, making north of 6 figures is pretty good. And I sat in a hotel room right outside of Chicago. I had been in 3 different cities in 3 weeks. I was a catastrophe adjuster with insurance company. And so I'm sitting there and I'm like, if this ain't it, what is it? You doing good. You own your own property. You can help your family out when you need to. You traveling the country. And I started asking myself, well, man, what are you passionate about? What are you passionate about? I'm looking at my tattoos. They primarily about my grandmother. I'm like, man, I miss my grandma. I always have. I always dedicated every single thing I accomplished to her to this point in my life. I got my little traveling blender juicer contraption. I got menus from juice bars. I'm like, health, I love health. I like helping people lose weight and getting healthy myself and so on and so forth. And so I'm like, health and grandma. And it's like God just reached to the clouds and was like, boy, I'm trying to tell you what to do. And I just had it clear. I had it clear. It was one of the most clear moments of my life. And I said, okay, I know what I got to do. Didn't know the name of it. Didn't know how. Didn't know where. Didn't know when. But from that day forward, I put everything I could into starting a juice bar and honoring my grandmother a reality.
So how long have you been in business?
We will celebrate 8 years in business July 25th.
Okay.
So, yeah, we started July 25th of 2015.
Okay. Yeah. And so locations?
Our current locations. So we've opened actually, what is it? I had to count. Up north. We've opened 8 locations in as many years, and we currently have 4 that have survived. We've lost some due to different reasons.
COVID, I think.
COVID was one. Our first one, I didn't know what I was doing from a lease perspective. Signed a bad deal, but it worked really well. Downtown was the COVID location. One in Springfield where the entire grocery store closed down, and then then 2 more. One in YMCA up north where it wasn't a demographic for it. Just didn't work, and then another in a Price Chopper up north. That same thing. It just wasn't the demographic. But today, successfully, we have a location in Springfield, Missouri, inside of a Price Cutter down South National that we don't operate. It's a licensee location for us. We've got a location at 118th and Row in Town Center Plaza in Leawood, Kansas. We've got the first ever brick and mortar black-owned business to ever exist in Whole Foods history in the Brookside Whole Foods Market. And then our primary, our flagship is at 30th and soon to be Troost Avenue. A little precursor there for you, but 3000 Troost Avenue is our primary location, the only real estate that we own.
Okay. Well, that's good. That's a great story.
Yeah. Thank you.
I remember hearing it some years ago, but hearing it again kind of reinforces your determination and drive that you have to honor your grandmother and have us eating healthy.
Yes, sir.
Because, you were talking about the fried chicken, and I was thinking about what I was going to have for lunch today. It won't be fried chicken. So you went from that, and then here recently you became a member of the Parks Board. You resigned that position, but you were a member of the Parks Board. So tell us about that journey, because that was interesting, because you advocated to remove J.C. Nichols' name from the most talked about fountain in Kansas City. So tell us how that came about.
Absolutely. So when I first got out of college, my pops, he always encouraged me to be active civically, to know what was going on, to know who were in positions of power, and how to sew back into community. It's something I seen him do through his stores, the Good to Go stores back in the day, for years in different ways. And so as soon as I got out of college, the first thing I did was volunteer for Janice Ellis's mayoral campaign. And from the time I got out of college and volunteering on that campaign, phone banking, just in the trenches with her, albeit in a losing effort, it really gave me this insatiable appetite to pour into the city. And so I started doing everything from giving out cold water on my birthday to raising toys and money for the Gillis home, doing a annual ugly sweater event, to having the likes of LeBron James in town for an event, and so on and so forth. And so I started to build a name as someone that, had their fingers in the mud of Kansas City, actively in so many different ways. And so when I decided to open Ruby Jeans, it was me putting my flag down, but I had already been supporting so many people, so many efforts, that I believe that it was successful because of the trust Kansas City had in me as a young person. Where Parks and Rec came about, it just came organically. I still am actively working to revitalize the Purcell Stairs. It's a feat that I've been fighting tooth and nail to accomplish over the last 4 to 5 years. And I won't say unsuccessfully, but I'll say it's been a journey. But Mayor Quentin Lucas, he knew about that effort, and he said, hey, it seems like you got a heart for this work. What do you think about the Parks and Rec Board? I had no clue. I had no, they weren't in my purview whatsoever. So I looked into it a little bit, and and realizing that they are such an asset holder of Kansas City, I saw it to be an opportunity for a real voice to sit at the table. And so I went in and still didn't know all the meeting rules and this and that. So I observed for a while. But then I got active. George Floyd got murdered, and I was sitting in my apartment, and in our apartment, the front door had been broken out. We was right off the plaza. And so we was right in the mix of all the fallout from that event. And even growing up in the hood and going to Ruskin, I had never felt the type of energy I felt, and seeing the type of outcry and helicopters flying over and snipers on the roof and news van getting burnt at one end of the street, the photographer unfortunately getting murdered at the other end. And I'm sitting there as a Parks and Rec commissioner. I'm like, well, man, I'm not, me going out there and marching. What is that gonna move the needle? Me posting on Facebook, is that gonna move the needle? How can I move the needle? And so I had heard this conversation of J.C. Nichols, years past, and I knew the fountain and the parkway existed. And then I thought it ironic that all of the outcry, all of the protests happened right there at that nexus point that honored this man that wouldn't have wanted all these black people to even have their feet on that ground.
Right.
And I said, I think that's that's a necessary change that we need to push for. So I wrote a memo in June of 2020 to every political official that you can imagine in Kansas City. I got support from great people like you and many others, and we got to drive that change home. And I actively kept working towards things, getting the drive home, and honoring for Dr. King, and now actively working to rename Troost as an individual. I stepped down from the Parks and Rec board. I don't know if you want to go into that, but I just ultimately I decided that my voice is a free voice. My voice is not a voice that should be bound or should be, stifled in any way. And me sitting as a part of a quasi-political body, I felt that it could compromise and bind the freedom of my voice.
So you resigned from the park board. So since you opened the door, why?
I just gave that, that very fluffy explanation. But racism. I saw Roosevelt Lions get railroaded, and I'll just call it how it is. I saw it point blank, and I said, you know what, I can't be a part of this. I'm not one of those. I think the Parks Board has become a board that it's a stepping stone. It's a place you go to go somewhere else, or it's a place you go to enforce a legacy that never existed or that you want to grow. And I was not a part of it for either. And so once I saw what was taking place, there's no way me as a man of faith, a believer, the only judge that I really abide by is Jesus. And there's no way I could sit there and see this happen and know it's happening and know it's wrong and just go along with it, to sit in this position of power, to say, yeah, I'm on the Parks Board, and have my chest all poked out, knowing that there's filth behind the veil.
Mm-hmm. And so what are the plans, or they just die about naming the fountain? Does the fountain have a name?
The fountain is nameless. And I think that fits. I proposed Dream Fountain. At the time I had also proposed that J.C. Nichols go to MLK. The fountain is nameless, and the street, J.C. Nichols Parkway, reverted to what it was prior, Mill Creek Park. Okay. Mill Creek Parkway, rather.
Okay. And so they did change the name of the street as well. They
did. It went back to it. And the street was the real impetus. The fountain was, I call it a bonus.
Okay. And it's interesting that you bring that up, and then we're going to go on to Troost Avenue. It's always been interesting to me that Emmanuel Cleaver Boulevard stops at Main Street and doesn't cross over into the plaza.
Yeah.
So I think that would be remarkable to have that fountain named after, if not Martin Luther King, Harriet Tubman fountain,
yeah,
or something, to have that over on the other side of Main Street. So maybe we should name it Chris Goode Fountain.
Nah.
So Troost Avenue, Troost to Truth. Troost. Who was Troost? Let people know in case they don't know. Who was
Dr. Benoit Troost, first resident physician, built the first hotel in Kansas City, but he was a slave owner. He owned 6 people. And so, for me, the celebratory nature of Troost Avenue, he was honored with this 11-mile stretch because of his, his business acumen and, his acumen around medicine, with no onus paid to the fact that he was okay with the rape, murder, enslavement, purchase of black bodies. It's an afterthought, and we've just allowed it to perpetuate itself for decades. And then not only is it named after such a disgusting individual, it's the street that divides Kansas City. Mm-hmm. It's the street that people are afraid of to this day. I'll tell people, they'll ask me, where are your locations? What do you do? Oh, I own a juice bar. Well, where are they at? Oh, well, we got one on Troost, and they'll kind of clutch their pearls and like, oh. And I'll say, oh, we got one in Leawood. Oh, okay, there's my spot. And there's this fear still surrounding Troost and the east side of Kansas City, all while out-of-town investors, in-town investors are coming in and monetizing this fear-mongering. And so I don't think that it is the dividing line. I don't think that there should be one that's allowed to maintain itself through narrative or through actuality. I've been tending to the land on Troost, our own little corner, and now stretching beyond that for years. And what I see it's not scary to me, you know. I see all walks of life. I see people that are from there. I see people that have moved in. And I don't think that we as a city should allow it to still separate us, still be a scary narrative around this street. But I think it starts with the disgrace of this disgusting individual, Dr. Benoit Troost. I think it starts with ripping that down, telling the truth about it. We've started making placemaking. So we have a small educational exhibit that was stood up by Entitled Learning. It just went in Saturday. But the idea is, we want to take his name down, but we also want to inform people why. And so we've started that effort from our own real estate. You walk in, you can play a game at each table to learn about the history, to learn about why this is being proposed. There's a big sign when you walk in. There's a huge mural on the side of the building. And so I think truth is something that pushes us forward. I think it's something that, you know, even in modern day, is there's people and organizations that will try to spin off two different truths. It's not really the case. It's only one truth. It's only one truth. There's no multiple truths. And so truth is universal. It's not divisive. It spins the narrative that's always existed around the red line of Kansas City, and it flips it on its head, and it unites people. It brings people to the table to talk about the truth of what happened, and then be real about how do we go to where we want to go in the future. And the name doesn't just do that in and of itself, but it's a pretty good start.
So what are the property owners along Troost? Have you talked to any of them?
I have.
Are they on board?
They are. I mean, it's been a resounding yes. We've had 2 different collaboration sessions. I don't call them engagement sessions. I've learned that there are factions that stand those up just to check boxes. But we held 2 collaboration sessions on our own merits, with our own resources, one in person, one virtual, with business owners, community leaders, homeowners up and down Troost. And it was a resounding yes. It was a resounding, how do we get it done? We have a petition that has probably about 1,500 signatures on it that are a resounding yes. I've been on every news outlet, media platform, took calls on NPR, a resounding yes. The next action, I have a design in my email right now from a young black designer that created this graphic that comes in the form of a mailer. So Health Forward Foundation donated $10,000 to this campaign. And I'll send out a mailer over the next couple of weeks to every single Troost address that exists. This is not required legislatively. It's never been done actually in the history of any such issue, especially not from a private citizen. And so every single Troost address, whether you're a business owner, a homeowner, whether you're in Gladstone or out by Bannister, you will get a mailer at least telling you what the history of this topic is, and then giving you a QR code to then allow your voice to be heard. Because what I've learned in doing this work is that transparency, involvement, collaboration, that's the way. It's not, hey, let's do this. I got this great idea and let's just shoot to get it done in whatever way we can. But that's our next action. That's our final action. And from that point, I won't be, and I say this very humbly, I won't be in a posture of request at that point. I'll move to a posture of demand very, very swiftly, and really demand of our council leaders to take action, because everything that we are obligated to do and well beyond would have been done at that point.
So Troost goes, you're talking about the Kansas City version of Troost, from wherever it begins at to wherever it ends at. What about the other areas? Because you mentioned Gladstone, is it a Troost?
It runs north, so it runs 11 miles, and I don't know exactly the start and stop points, but it's an 11-mile stretch, and it does run up north. Okay,
so they would have to engage in it too, or could they leave theirs as?
No, we're going after the whole stretch.
The whole stretch,
absolutely.
Okay, and the council members, have you engaged with any of them so far?
Yes. Yes. You know, and I will say that there have been some supportive proponents, but I think that because we are in a campaign cycle, there's fear attached to this subject, and so I've been ignored quite a bit. You know, it's gotten me to the point of frustration. It's gotten me to the point of making a statement like that, you know, as soon as this mail alert goes back and those viewpoints are received from address holders, I won't be asking anymore. I will not be asking anymore. And I'm not saying that from an individual standpoint. We plan to show up in force in droves and make sure that, you know, they recognize that they're not just ignoring me, they're ignoring the voice of Kansas City at this point.
So you're going to try to do it with this council, or you're going to wait till after the election?
This council.
Okay.
I want to see an action come before this council. In a perfect world, and it may be lofty, I'd like to see those first street names start to be changed around Juneteenth.
Oh, okay. And that would be right before the election.
It would be.
A good plan.
And we've been at it, I mean, for months and months and months. And, you know, I've done everything that they could require of us and seen no opposition. But now we don't sit in the suits and we don't sit at the table. And so they have to do their part.
So why haven't they done it? They know you got this momentum. You've been talking about it for, about a year now, maybe longer than that. Mm-hmm. So why don't they just do it without it coming into a semi-confrontational posture?
I think, I can only assume, you know, I can't read their minds, but for there to be council people and people in positions of power that are starting to ignore something that has been a resounding yes from the people, not just from me, through many different mediums, I think that there's a obvious strategy around the campaign cycle. And just staying away from something that could become tumultuous or sticky, or, you know, maybe there's people in the north that will push back too hard. And so, you know, I think that that's what it is, because I can't reasonably assume anything else. But that won't be my issue, my qualm. It'll be theirs to grapple with, because I think that anybody that's on the other side of it, once the opposition truly shows itself, it will be an opposition that has to speak to why they want to see such a narrative perpetuated that's been going on for way too many decades. They'll have to clarify, why is it that you're ignoring this subject? Why is it that you are now standing in the way of change? Mm-hmm. And so I read something that talked about imagination really being the conduit to freedom. I think that a lot of times politicians, they get comfortable in the status quo. They get comfortable in mediocrity of this municipality. And I've seen it time and time again through votes and so on and so forth. You and I have sat there on different issues and we've seen it. Mm-hmm. Whether we speak to it or not, every time we've seen it time and time again. And I think that status quo placement is safe. It's safe ground. It can get you just past this election cycle, and then you'll engage. Mm-hmm. But that's not an option here.
Yeah. Safe. Get in a safety zone.
Yep.
I could sit here and talk to you like all day. Or listen to you talk all day. My guest today has been Chris Goode. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You know what? After the truth signs get changed, we're going to have you back, and you're going to talk about the journey. You're going to do the first sign. That'll be like 2 streets that you've had input in.
It would be.
Wow.
3.
3?
Yeah.
That's right, 3.
Yeah.
Wow. That's something that you can pass on to your little guy.
Well, I mean, that's what it's about. You know, if I'm not working towards, and I got another little guy on the way.
What?
I do.
What?
I do. And
well, congratulations.
Thank you. And it's a song, We Shall Not Be Moved. And they talk about we're fighting for our children. Like they talk about we're fighting for our children. Mm-hmm. We're fighting for our children. That's all I'm doing.
So y'all heard it here first. Another little Chris is on the way. On the way. Thanks so much for joining us today. And as always, I've got the greatest audience in the world. Till next week, remember, tough times don't last. Tough people do. Until next week, peace.